Welcome back. Welcome to episode 6 of Two Gay Dads. I'm Nate.
I'm Jason.
And we just want to stop before we go any further. Thank you all for your patience. We have been sick with the flu. It has swept through our household, but we are all feeling better, and we have a great show for you today.
This year at our household with the flu, which is why we didn't have last week's episode, but we are really excited for what we have in store for you today.
I think you had a piece of news you wanted to share first, though, didn't you?
I did. So as a follow-up to our last regular episode where we rated Christmas movies, Us Weekly, although it's unofficial, has ranked A Keller Christmas Vacation as the #1 Hallmark Christmas movie for 2025. It's an LGBT-themed Christmas movie starring Jonathan Bennett, and it's worth checking out if you haven't caught it. Even though we are past the holiday season, we've canceled our Hallmark Plus subscription until next year when we'll bring it back again for a month. But it was a big deal that with the shrinking amount of LGBTQ characters represented in the media today, that we are once again seeing an LGBTQ themed movie rated as the #1 holiday movie. And one more thing, Nate, because I know you'll like this. We got so excited about rating all of our holiday shows, we completely ignored Heated Rivalries.
That's a crime because, we're two gay men, and if you follow two gay men, any gay men, Heated Rivalry is all we're talking about right now. And that last episode was so good.
It was so good. I almost said a spoiler. We won't say spoilers here. It's only 6 episodes. If you haven't watched Heated Rivalries on HBO yet, you should absolutely go do that. It is absolutely stunning. So what's on tap for this week's show? Well, we have an amazing interview with our friends Chad and Aaron Oban from North Dakota, who shared their adoption story about their son Evan with us. We've got This Week in the Gay Agenda talking about more threats to marriages and other not great things that are happening in our world. So Nate,
this is Two Gay Dads. Let's get into it. Before we start, we want to name that today's conversation includes adoption and the adoption of a native child. We approach this with deep respect, knowing that these stories sit at the intersection of love, loss, history, and identity. Chad and Aaron share their experience as parents and learners, not as experts, and we're grateful for their openness. We offer this conversation with care and humility.
So we are really excited about today's conversation. Our dear friends, Chad and Aaron Oban, who are parents who are incredible and dear friends, have agreed to come on our podcast and share their adoption story that is both deeply loving and thoughtfully intentional. But more than that, when Nathan and I were starting our process, I pestered these two with a whole lot of questions because they beat us to the punch with adoption, and they were patient, they were kind. I think Chad only rolled his eyes about 4 times, which is pretty good if you know Chad. But they were so patient with our hundreds of sometimes ridiculous questions about that. So Chad and Aaron, welcome to our podcast, and thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for inviting us. Yeah.
So for listeners who are meeting you for the first time, how would you describe your family? And either one of you can answer this first.
Go ahead, Chad. How would you describe our family?
How would I describe our family? I thought this was me sort of filling in the blanks and you
I'm so
answering
interested.
the questions. So Aaron and I, we got married in 2010. Evan was adopted. Holy cow, this is going to be problematic remembering dates. In 2016. He's a 3rd grader, 9-year-old. Today he's at a STEM camp here in Bismarck, North Dakota. But like I would say most straight couples who end up adopting a child, it wasn't a straight path to adoption, right? You don't just get married and say, we're going to adopt a child. So, we went through some stuff, with fertility and going through the adoption process to get where we are right now, which I think we just saw a post on Facebook of when we officially announced Evan was our kid, that Aaron posted something from the show. What's the show that This Is Us? No.
Yep.
Where it said, the first time I met you, I knew you were mine, or something along those lines. And that's sort of how it was. When Evan was born in October and in South Dakota, we knew the second we saw him, he was meant to be our son. And he's grown up to be a pretty fantastic kid. He's got some of his dad's, I'm going to say wit, but mostly annoying smartass.
Baseball teams.
great taste in world twice back-to-back world champion baseball team. So, we call ourselves the three peas in a pod within our house because we're just a small little family living in Bismarck, North Dakota. So, Aaron, I was expecting you to answer that question first. So I gave a really incredibly bad, rambly answer. Thank you.
Describe our family as lucky, um, happy, content. I would also have used the three P's is how we affectionately refer to ourselves. And although it is just our immediate family, the three of us, in our household, we surrounded and Evan is surrounded by uh, so much love from other people. We each have our mothers still. So he's got two grandmas who adore him. He's got aunts and uncles and cousins and so many friends who frankly treat him as their own sometimes, which we appreciate, but I mean probably love us more than we deserve sometimes.
Aaron, not
But
not to
I
interrupt, but I mean, some of our friends treat him better than we treat him. Like he knows
yeah.
our friend Jess says yes to everything, and so when Jess is around, Evan circumvents his parents and asks Jess if he can have a little more screen time.
Yeah.
It
No,
is
I
that is I think that's a common trait. Maybe I mean because Lizzie
mhm.
experiences the same thing. You have these, the friends that are, not the parents who, oh yeah, sure, you can have that extra piece of sugary candy at 8:15 at night. No, they need to go to bed.
Yeah, no, I would describe. I think we've got a lot of love, we've got a lot of laughter, probably more sarcasm than what is necessary most days. But we're a pretty happy, I think, fairly normal family. I mean, I just feel awfully lucky to be a part of it.
That's amazing. Just kind of digging in a little bit before adoption was your story. What did you guys know about adoption and when did you know that what do you know now that you didn't know then, I guess?
I mean, admittedly, I knew very little about adoption, probably not surrounded by a lot of folks who were adopted, or if they were, didn't talk about it. I think probably Chad and I were both old enough and mature enough to know that sometimes if and when you decide to have a family, sometimes it doesn't happen as easily as for some as it does for others. And although we didn't like talk about it a lot when we, got together and then got married about how we would have a family, I think it's almost like we both knew that whether it was traditional or in another way that if we were going to have and raise children together. I certainly didn't care if it was a child who shared our blood or not. I think love happens pretty naturally. Admittedly, didn't know a lot about it though.
Yeah, I would say, in terms of things that surprised me about, once we made the decision we're going to do adoption is the cost. I don't think people talk enough about the cost of adoption. And I'm not talking about emotionally, I'm talking about dollars and cents, that it's an expensive proposition. I also think people often think of adoption as being the movie Juno, right? You have a high school girl who gets pregnant and she makes this decision. That's a pretty unique circumstances. Often it's a lot of tremendously strong young women making really, really tough decisions on behalf of their kids. And that's the other thing that I think we don't talk enough about birth parents and the heroic decisions they make to put their kids up for adoption. And, we're forever
Place their children.
place their
Place their
children.
children in adoption.
Man, she's going to totally correct the language I use throughout this. So listeners should be prepared for that. I mean, absolute hero. Like, we're forever indebted to Evan's birth mom for making that decision because I don't know what our lives without him.
We talked about that when we shared on our third episode when we shared our adoption story. We talked about the important role that birth parents play, specifically more often than not just the birth mother, and how they're unsung heroes, and how every adoption story is a story of love and making a family. Not that this child is unwanted, it's that this child is so loved that they are doing the bravest thing that any parent could ever do, which is say, I'm not in a position to raise this child. And so I'm going to pick a family that can give my child everything they deserve. It is such a underappreciated part of the story. So thinking back to kind of the beginning, when did is your journey to become parents, like at what point did adoption kind of first enter the conversation for you?
Well, I suppose probably after I had had back-to-back miscarriages in 2011 and in 2012. And, again, when I mentioned like we were both old enough to know people who this is such a thing for women and couples to face. It probably didn't expect it to be us, but after the second one, I probably realized it was as hard on Chad as it was on me when he just looked at me and said, we can't do this again. Like, I can't see you like that. This is just not how when there are other ways we can do this. Why would we do this again? And so we went through all of the stages of sadness and anger and grief, and not long after that we met with an attorney friend of ours who practices family law, just to like learn a little bit maybe about the legal process and see if there were any agencies she had worked with that she might kind of recommend, because we were people who didn't know a lot about this. So that was really the first time it entered a real serious conversation. It was probably about the early 2013 that we really talked about it, but
And I think that,
didn't move far past that initial conversation.
yeah, and I think the initial conversation in sort of, okay, learning more about it. And then like we didn't really move, or there wasn't an urgency until I think at one point, Aaron and I were having dinner and I looked at her and I said, if we're going to do this, we need to do this before I'm 40. Right. I mean, part of it was age. We ended up adopting Evan when I was just short of 41. There hasn't been a day in my life where I haven't brought Evan to daycare, other places where people haven't asked about his grandpa.
Well, look at that beard, man. Come
Yeah, I
on.
know that the beard is really putting it over the top. But I think that's what ultimately, like, I feel like we sort of made the decision we're going to do adoption. But as you guys know, it's a thorough process. And so, really, diving in to do all that we need to do, I think it took that conversation of being like, listen, we got to go now, or I feel like I'm too old to do this. I've told Aaron before, after we adopted Evan, if I would have known how great parenthood, I would have started this like 10 years prior and we'd have about 12 kids at our house right now. So it's maybe a good thing we waited until I was 40, where we didn't have time to do too much more.
It would certainly be easier to get off the floor.
Yeah.
You talk about, I understand now why parents do their kids early.
Yeah. I actually had a friend who told me, holy cow, you're having a kid when you're 40? You realize that means he's going to be under 10 when you're 50. I mean, how are you going to do these things? I was like, yeah, I feel it too, man. I feel it.
I'm out.
Listen, I saw a meme the day after Christmas that said, warning, if you're over 40, parents, don't wrap your Christmas presents on the floor. And I'm like, why didn't I see that on the 24th? Why did I see this on the 26th? Because wrapping those presents this year and then getting up off the floor was.
This must be a dad thing, because I can still get up off the floor pretty well, and
I mean,
I'm
look,
over 40. I'm not as old as Chad, but I'm over 40.
thanks for that. I actually turned 50 in a couple of weeks, and I just got my AARP notice in the mail yesterday.
He's feeling very trolled.
I am. Yep.
So in that 3-year period that you talked about, kind of when that initial conversation happened and then you start moving toward that decision point, how did you all choose your adoption agency, and what made you feel like they were the right pick for you?
It really was the recommendation. I mean, the attorney wasn't just, she was like a very, very dear friend of ours who we've known for a long time and just trust inherently. She had worked with a couple different ones. And I mean, again, we only know our own experience, so I'm sure there are pros and cons to all of them, but this was a very small agency started by a couple moms who had adopted their children and who understood then the process and how challenging it was, and decided that they wanted to make it maybe more accessible for others. So
That's
and they
incredible.
focused their work in the Dakotas. So it was not a large agency. They tried to keep it very personal, not working with too many adoptive parents or birth parents. So
Yeah,
that,
and I like that they weren't showing 15 different families to every prospective mother who came in, right? I mean, that they were just trying to find placement for 5 or 6 families at one point. It felt like they were going to care more about us. And as you guys know, I mean, you start getting your book shown to people, you don't know if they're going to say yes right away, and if it's gonna, and we happen to have it. We actually got chosen twice. The first one ended with the birth mother having a stillborn.
Mm.
So then we got to start the process all over again.
Got to, yeah.
Yeah, was very, very difficult. But then we got chosen again very quickly after that. And we had to have some real conversations about, were we ready? Right. Because like, you went through the grief and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, we've got this other potential baby for you. Do you mind if we show? And we had to have that conversation. Are we ready to go through this again? And thank God we did. Thank God we said yes.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it was, it's funny you brought up the turning 40 as the kind of what pushed us forward. And I kind of forgot that because at the same time, my dad had been diagnosed with terminal cancer. That was sort of the like, oh God, yeah. I mean, we need to move on this. Life is short. Ideally, my father would have met, our child, and that didn't end up happening. But that's where I remember sort of, okay, we gotta check these boxes a little bit faster, move along in all of the steps of the process.
Kind of when it went from a maybe to we're doing this.
Yeah.
So, was there a particular part of the process that you felt super prepared for? And was there anything that completely humbled you?
Yeah, I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I will tell you one of the things that I learned through that adoption process is you have no control, right? I mean, you can only control what you can control. And if somebody chooses you or doesn't choose you, and so you've got that sort of I like to know what's going to happen in my life. And so having that sort of out of my control was very, very difficult for me. On top of the fact that I'd lived 40 years without being a parent and trying to figure out, am I prepared to be a parent? I don't care if it's through adoption or otherwise. I kind of like my life right now. And so I think the thing that I wasn't prepared for is just that piece of not being able to be in control of anything and just, you know, when, you know, are you getting picked? Where's the baby going to get born at? I know you guys had to travel quite a distance. We only had to go to South Dakota, but that was a part that I think I struggled the most with.
I I mean, it was helpful that there was like literally a list of things you had to go through. Like you're checking boxes to make sure you're getting
Yep.
through the whole thing. I think it maybe was not as prepared for some of the conversations it forced Chad and I to have that I'm not sure everybody has before they make a conscious decision to have a child together.
Why I'm sure
Frankly,
not.
I wish there was a lot of like the training things that we had to do. I wish everybody who was going to have children would have to go through some of those and force some conversations about what our own childhoods were like and what would we like about it to be similar? How would we want it to be different? How do we view discipline? How do we communicate? What are the division of duties? Like very practical and important conversations to have.
We tell we tell the story about the first time our social worker came in and she sat down and she looks at Jason and she goes, "What do you like about him?" Nobody starts a conversation that way, but it's like, okay, now I actually have to articulate why I am with this person that I want to become a parent with. Boy, if more traditional family conversations started that way.
We also there was one specific thing I think that probably gave both of us more pause than we expected, and that was when we said we were open to adopting a child of a different race. They strongly encouraged that we take an unconscious bias assessment. And so you answer a series of questions and kind of see how you score. And both Chad and I would describe ourselves as being very open-minded and accepting, thoughtful, well-informed people. And I think it was a good reminder that we're all living in a bit of a bubble and that we all come into life with our own perspectives and that bring bias and to remember that, like to recognize it, confront it and to name it and that if this is something we were going to do, it had to really be open to learning and growing and challenging our own biases.
You know, it's funny, Aaron, when you started to say one thing, I knew exactly what the thing was that
Mhm,
you were going to talk about because I do remember those conversations where there's places where you and I answered differently on a question. And I
mhm.
would be like, I would push you, you would push me. We'd have like real conversations about it and sort of took away that, we're progressive, but having real conversations about these things and how we would handle having a child who's a different
Mhm.
race in a real world. This isn't some hypothetical. This was in a real in that con that I think that made our relationship grow. It prepared us to adopt Evan, but I think it also forced us to have some conversations that we would have otherwise not had.
And I think also recognize like a lot of those were differences in our sometimes in our genders, sometimes
Mm.
in I grew up in a really small town. Chad grew up in a larger town. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, but
It's interesting that you talked about the unconscious bias and the conversations that all of the different paperwork that you had to fill out makes you have. And for Nathan and I, one of the things that we struggled with, we were open to a child of any gender, any race. We didn't care very much like you. It was like, have love, want to give it to a baby. But
Mhm.
some of the places where we had to do some self education was on like the substance abuse issues that can be prevalent with
Yep,
birth parents, and what was our comfort level with. I don't know if your paperwork did, but ours like went through like drug by drug by
yep,
drug and
yep,
alcohol
yep.
and like what is your comfort level, and we had a little rating scale, and we had to have some real conversations. And while our social worker was weird and kooky, she was really honest and helpful in helping us make a, like, who'd have thought that like using a cocaine substance is less bad than drinking when you have a baby in there, but
God, so
things
we
you
have
learn, right?
super similar experience. Basically, we were told you're going to be fine with weed. Everything else, is worse. I'm like, okay,
Well,
well, yeah,
I
don't
think
don't
what's
know anything.
Degrees of worse.
what was also interesting about that is if you're going into this process thinking you're going to be getting a baby that has not been involved in any substance at all or had
That's
some
right.
perfect you're not going to find a baby because again it's not Juno, or you're going to be waiting a long time to get chosen if you're really really particular.
Yeah, that's right. And I think we felt the age crunch too. We had a very similar thing. I'm older than Nathan, and our deadline was before I turned 40. And we got it, I think it was 37 when Lizzie was born. So we were, on front of that. But that was the longest runway we were gonna give ourselves on this. And so part of it was like, how do we take down as many barriers and eliminate as many things that might screen us out when they're trying to match us with birth parents as possible?
Hmm.
So, I know you mentioned cost, but was there something else that people don't talk enough about around the adoption process? Or if you want to expound on cost, that's okay too. But what's something people need to know more about in this adoption process?
So I'll jump in here first, Aaron, and then I'll let you go. I think back to something we referred to earlier, the birth parents in this whole thing who choose to, what words am I supposed to use?
Place
Place
a child in
place their
adoption.
child in adoption. I mean, there is sort of this, and I don't want to get too politically here, but there's some ideas that when we're talking about women's right to choose, that well, just put your kid up for adoption, place your kid for adoption, it's all fine. Just ignoring like it's the trauma, the all the stuff that goes along with making that decision. It's a big choice. And I'm not sure as a society we do enough to support the women making those decisions and those families making the decisions after they make the decision. And so that's one of the things that I hope people understand is, these young women, often young women, are making a really, really tough decision. And it's not just some flippant decision saying, oh, I'm going to, give my kid up for adoption. It's a big deal.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I agree with all of that. I was at the time we had that Evan was born, I was serving in the North Dakota State Senate, and so was often surrounded by conversations that now I was inserting myself into that I previously would not have, and it was mostly around assumptions about the ease of just carrying a pregnancy and literally handing your child over to another family and the ease that they would assume that comes with was very frustrating to me, as as people who had just sat next to a young woman who, no matter how confident she was in the decision she made, was very difficult and will continue to live with whatever. Again, no matter how confident they are in that decision, may very well think about it for the rest of their lives. Again, not everybody birth parents don't feel the same. I make no assumptions that everybody feels the same way about everything. And that's probably what I would say is drop all assumptions. As Chad said, like their every day feels out of your control because at any point anybody can change their mind. And um as two people who are very we are pro-choice people, that also means that decision is for that person to make up until legally they can't anymore, and knowing how vulnerable that is for everybody and having to just sit with that, and that there's not a damn thing you can do about it unless you decided not to be a part of the process anymore. So I think that's somebody described it as a roller coaster. And some days are really, really high and some days are really, really low. And neither Chad or I are roller coaster riders. So, I can fly by the seat of my pants a heck of a lot easier than Chad can. And so that
That
kind of
tracks.
that lack of control thing was very hard. But I think just accepting that no matter how prepared you are, no matter how much you check the boxes and you follow the process, not any single adoption is probably exactly the same. So we didn't even want people's advice. We didn't want people's opinions because we already knew how vulnerable that the feeling of the experience is. And so that group of people who we would seek or take advice from was very, very small.
It's just to jump in really quick on one thing that Aaron just said, seeking the advice. I'm sure you guys heard the same stuff as we're going through this process from people who are like, oh, I know this one couple who they traveled all the way to Texas and then the mom changed the mind, whatever. And it's like, I'm in the middle of this. I don't need to hear these
Yeah.
stories. I know they exist, but keep them to yourself. That was very
Yeah.
frustrating.
Our adoption agency had a Facebook group that they invited us to because they worked in it was American Adoptions. They work in 7 out of the 50 states, and we joined that Facebook group. And so while we're a family in waiting to read the stories of people who had disruptions or multiple disruptions in the process was heartbreaking enough. I didn't need to hear the horror stories from someone's third cousins twice removed.
Right. Yeah.
I think too, we don't talk enough about like, okay, now the adoption has happened. You've adopted this child, but in a lot of cases, especially these days, that doesn't mean that the birth mother goes away. Like in our case, and I'm curious to know about yours, birth mom is part of our life now. And, we send her pictures and we're texting with her and we go see her once a year. And so like it's not just I'm, this placed child in my life. It is also I have now assumed some heart responsibility for the human being that brought them into the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we of course were of all the boxes you check about what you're open to in terms of gender and age and race and all the things, open, closed, partially open, was all also on the table. But we were told by the agency that most adoptions today are certainly more open than they are closed. And so we had, well, admittedly, the we is more me. It was much right away. It was all through our agency, so they kind of acted as the communicator between us, sharing pictures, and that trailed off quite a bit as time has gone on, and we were in contact a number of years ago. I mean, Evan's birth mom struggles with a lot of things that we can't begin to understand, and we talk openly with Evan about like life. Life is not a straight line. It's not perfect for everybody. And when he talks about wanting to see her again, and I mean, we have a picture book, so almost every birthday, Evan wants to look through the pictures, the picture book we made of his birth, where he sees pictures of his birth mom and his sibling and 5 generations of his birth family that were all in the in the hospital room with us at one time. Um, we talk about the importance of making sure that people are that she's healthy. We want all good things for her. We know how much she loved Evan, and hopefully someday we could spend some time seeing each other again, but that time is not right now.
So a couple, again, following up on something Aaron said, there is a difference in us being a straight couple, and Evan is aware of his birth mom and will talk about his birth mom. He never talks about his birth dad. There's never competition for who is dad, and not competition, but sort of awareness. And there is sort of a difference between those two things. And it's going to be shocking to everybody that I wasn't really aware of that until Aaron pointed out the fact that, there's not another mom or another dad
Yeah.
in this scenario. And I will tell you, Evan is very aware of his birth family. A couple nights ago, I was laying in bed, and might have been the day before Christmas, and he was saying, "Okay, so if the Oban family comes over and the Hill family comes over, and then my birth family comes over," and he started counting all the people who would be at our house, and he was naming, siblings and great grandmas so very aware of it, even though we don't have sort of what Nathan you just described there with Lizzie's mom, right? That was what we expected to have, but it hasn't worked out that way to have that kind of relationship moving forward.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Chad. Our social worker, when we were going through the process, said that one of the reasons for the increase in LGBTQ adoption, specifically for gay men, was as a huge increase is that birth moms were picking them at a higher rate because no one else would ever call like the child
Interesting.
would not call anyone
Oh,
else mom, right?
Interesting.
So
interesting.
Lizzie's birth mom is the only mom
Sure.
that
Sure.
she'll ever know, right? And she calls her Mama V, right? Is what Lizzie calls her, but that is, was part of that was a aha moment. We had not thought about that,
Mhm.
through our process. So you just mentioned that Evan and his birth family. So, Evan is Native. And so can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about how you help him stay connected to his heritage, in his everyday life?
Well, I think we've taken the approach that this has to be more about just the day to day than you mentioned at the beginning earlier of a powwow. Like this can't be just a couple of white people taking their native child to a powwow and calling it good. At least for us. And so I think it's more he really understands that he is Native American and like feeling a sense of pride in that, having no shame. And whether it's Midwest culture, whether it's smaller towns, whatever it happens to be, we don't ever want him to not be proud of exactly who he is and exactly what his story is. And while it might be a little bit unique, he's not better or worse than anybody else. He is exactly who he is supposed to be. So just making sure that there are frankly like Native American art, Native American books, like making it a part of our life. We have friends who are Native American, making sure that his in his mind I think probably what some of his cousins picture as Native Americans are all what you see in a history book of people living on the plains in teepees, and that actually it's also his cousin, their cousin who lives up the street. So part of it is just really making it ingrained, making it who he is, and not just something we put on the side. I think.
The word pride is so important because this is the conversation that Aaron and I had. I mean, we want to make sure he's proud of being a Native American. And he came home this summer. He's outside playing with the neighborhood kids, and he's like, "Can you believe the neighbors didn't know I was Native American?" Like, what do you mean? How did that come up? And he said, "Well, they're talking about how tan I was." And I said, "Yeah, of course I'm tan. I'm Native American." And they're like, "What? You're Native American?" And he was like, "Yeah, and proud of being Native American." And I think he has a natural curiosity. I think he will end up diving in and learning more about, his culture and whatever, that kind of thing. Although he can't remember the Native American word for buffalo, no matter how many times we say it.
But his birth mother gave him a traditional Lakota name when he was born. I mean, again, he kind of struggles to say the whole thing, but he undoubtedly he is growing up in a very white world. And we know that. So we also want to make sure that we celebrate the differences, but also all the similarities, just that make the world a colorful, wonderful place.
Aaron, can you
How
say his
have
traditional name? Your
Matomani,
Matamani.
yes.
How have you found your experience and acceptance within the Native American community as white adoptive parents of a Native child? There's a complicated history there,
Yeah, big
and there's
time.
a lot of feelings that come with that.
Yeah, so I will, one of the
Yeah.
things that so when we first came home with Evan and we posted on social media after, all the legal stuff was done, I had a high school classmate of mine reach out to me, and she's Native American. And she said, "Hey, looks like Evan, born in Rapid City, but I saw the pictures of him. Seems to be Native American. I want you to know how great I think it is that you adopted a Native American. But you should also know that some Native Americans aren't going to like that very much." And then gave some, like, it wasn't like, "Hey, a warning." It was, "And here's some advice on sort of how to handle this." And so I think that is sort of an interesting thing that I thought a lot about probably in his first 6 months or year in life. Like, if we would take him to a powwow, what does this look like having two white people, walking around with a native? Are there people who are going to be uncomfortable with it? I think less about that now than I used to, because I feel like I'm just sort of his dad, but certainly something to very much be aware of, because there's an ugly history.
Yeah, I mean, I think not being afraid that is the reality, and there's have been so many instances through this that have forced me to like accept being uncomfortable with things and to not be defensive and to like sit in some of the discomfort that happens and be more understanding of why. And then also like teaching Evan why. We were down in Arizona and we went to a museum and went through, they had a really moving and painful section of the museum about boarding schools. And we explained to him, that the government used to take children, Native children, away from their families just because they were Native American and completely change who they are and how they were living. Just being real. I think being honest with him, not telling him more than what he needs to know, but telling him enough that as a 9-year-old he should understand and recognize in a beautiful, complicated world, that he's living in.
Yeah, the place down in Arizona, I think, was really an eye opener for me to walk through the boarding schools with Evan and looking at, like, there's pictures of kids who look like Evan, but the display or the exhibit that got to him the most is they had
The hair one.
what's that?
The hair one?
A hair one. They had a exhibit of a young man who, at the boarding school, they cut off all of his long hair, long braided hair, and Evan talked about it for days afterwards. Like, why would they cut off that boy's beautiful hair? And they had side by side of him with his long hair and then sort of the short hair next to it, and it stuck with him. Like, he understands that, Native American boys sometimes have long hair, but that
And what that
and
means,
what you know
why that's meaningful to the Native American, culture and tradition. Yeah,
Thank you so much for talking about that. I know it was not on the questions that I sent you ahead of time,
that's
but
okay.
we have talked a lot about on as part of our conversations on our show about the stigmas that come with different types of families.
Mhm,
We're LGBT people and we get asked where,
mhm.
dad's day out and where's mom? One of our other interviews was with a friend who's a single mom by choice. There's a lot of people who have very strong opinions about that. And so thank you for sharing that, because it's just another conversation about the stigmas and varying degrees of families and how that all fits together to, as you say, make a tapestry that is beautiful and wonderful.
Yeah.
So we like to kind of, end where we began, which is all about heart and love, right? That's why anyone would choose the adoption journey. So, what is one of the most memorable moments you've had with Evan since he joined your family?
God.
that's an impossible question. That's like, we just mentioned the one about the museum down in Arizona that sort of tugs on your heart. But here's the deal. The kid is super funny, and like, he makes us laugh all the time. He makes us want to jump out the window quite often as well,
I mean,
because he's a 9-year
Yep.
old boy. But like, nothing particularly pops into my head, but it's like, it's just such an adventure. And there's times where Aaron and I have to remind each other who's the adult, and
mhm.
remind each other that he's a 9-year old boy. And so he's going to forget his lunch in the car this morning when I brought him to STEM camp. And it's going to drive me crazy, but it's because he's a 9-year-old boy.
Yeah, I mean it's winter right now, so I am like near rage, on the verge of rage every day when it comes to stocking caps and gloves. Like, I don't know how much of our income we are going to spend on replacing stocking caps and gloves, but
I literally
here,
just had this conversation with
oh
Lizzie.
my God,
I was hoping by 9 it'd be better. You're telling me
it's
I've got
not.
at
It's
least four
worse.
more
It's
years of
not.
It's
this?
accelerating.
It's not. Yeah, and so now he's like, "Oh, Dad, I forgot my stocking cap. I'll just take yours." I mean, Chad's bald. Like, let the man cover up his head in the winter, but
And that's not a hypothetical. We
No,
literally were at school
no.
one day and I was like, Evan, where's your hat? And he's like, I think it's in my backpack. Looks through his backpack, it's not in there. And he's like, no worries, I'll just take yours. I'm like, it's -5 and I'm a bald man in North Dakota. No, you can't just take my hat. Did I give it to him? Of course I did.
That's
And I
what every
made it.
parent does, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He like I it's kind of hard to remember life before him. I I, I can't imagine that any parent doesn't feel this way about their children or their child, but like he is so wonderful and frustrating and makes you look at things differently, like makes you recognize how much kids are truly capable of, and also, with the stocking cap conversation, what sometimes they're not capable of. Watching him learn and be able to demonstrate that, recognizing how much he's taking in that you don't realize as he's gotten older and is developing his own personality. And, as Chad kind of mentioned, like picking up on some of our qualities and good and bad and good, bad, and otherwise, like watching him just kind of become who he is meant to be, is just the greatest joy we could ever ask for.
But if I could add one thing to that, seeing who he is meant to be, but seriously, if it could slow down. I mean,
Yeah.
like everybody
It
says
goes
that,
so
right? But
fast.
my God, he's halfway to being 18. And it feels like we were just in that bungalow
Yeah.
in Rapid City waiting to bring him home. And so, yeah, it's wonderful.
I think what I really love is like watching him interact with other people, teaching him to advocate for himself, like things that he, just trying to prepare him to be the best version of himself that he can be. But really, when I think walking into his school and he just
He gets
Funny
that from
how
his
they
We have
do
mom.
one of
that.
those
That is
too.
totally a nurture thing from his mom.
but I love his ability to have conversation with, to be interested in things that maybe we're not interested in, that that teaches us something new. I don't know, like parenthood is such a trip and I'm super glad we are taking it.
Okay, one last thing, because it's your fault for asking this open question about our son, but we did ask him at dinner last night, said, we're going on this podcast to talk about your adoption and what should we say about you? And he said, just tell him how great I am.
Well, you can check that box.
Mission
That's
accomplished.
God. Also keeping him humble, which we might have to work on.
Sounds so much like Elizabeth.
so, we end every one of our shows by sharing with our listeners something that Lizzie has taught us in the last week. And so, Aaron, we'll start with you. What's something that Evan has taught you in the last week? And it doesn't
Oh,
have to be
man.
overly complicated. Sometimes it could just be to remember to slow down. That was mine from last
Yeah.
week.
What has he taught me this week? Well, okay, we're sitting at the kitchen table and he's talking about Galileo, and I don't really know what he's talking about because do you know how long it's been since we learned that? And so it's like, okay, tell us more. Like, tell us what you've learned, and then And I think this conversation makes me remember how much of like myself he has made me discover that I never would have known.
Thank
That's
you,
the
Chad.
truth.
Yeah, so this isn't something he taught me, but I was with him and it reminded me of something. He and I were watching the end of the movie Field of Dreams. And at the end, when the Kevin Costner character just wants to have a catch with his dad, that's what he asked. It's such a good reminder when Evan is saying, let's play catch, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. And it can drive me nuts. Because again, as we've stated several times, I'm old, that I need to slow down and make sure that I'm playing catch with him when he's asking me to play catch, because there's not that many years left of him wanting to play catch with me. So I think slowing down, patience, appreciating this time is really important.
Absolutely.
He also says things to me every once in a while, like he'll just say, cuddle me. And I hear it from his 3-year-old, like he is 9 now, and it sounds the same as he would say it when he was 3. And for me, that's the same kind of feeling as when Chad is remembering to go play catch with his kid. He just wants his mama to cuddle with sometimes.
Unfortunately, guys, we're going to go on forever because I just thought of another, like going back to a funny story.
We're now just the doting
Yeah.
parents who, yeah.
So
Listen,
at
go ahead,
his
Chad.
parent-teacher conference this year, we sit down and it's Aaron and I, and the teacher sheepishly he hands over a letter that Evan has written to us because he had all the students write a letter to the parents, and it started out with, "Dear Mom, I love you more than Dad." And but he did it just to be funny. And the teacher was like, I asked him, is your dad not going to be there? Or why would you say this? And Evan knew. And then the second line was, because Mom always plays baseball with me outside, which is nonsense. That's always me. But that's the way he was. And Aaron always says, well, that's the relationship you set up with him, which
It
is
is.
probably true. But it was
Listen, this is the same kid. Ed and I get to work with each other, and I was a little bit behind on a deadline of something that I was supposed to get to Chad, and so was at that Arizona trip that you've mentioned. You send your kid over to pester me and be like, "My dad told me to ask you where that thing is that you owe him," and I'm like,
and poor Jason's like looking around like, where's this coming from? He's my
luckily, I had seen enough pictures of Evan to know who it was and knew exactly
Yeah.
what I was talking about. Now, did you have to do it in front of my boss? I don't know about that, but hey.
Here's the deal. He's our strong arm. He'll take care of business.
Well, listen, Chad and Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the Two Gay Dads podcast. It has been absolute joy to have you on and for you to share your story, and your devotion and love for your son is just remarkable. So thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for
Thanks for
having
having
us.
us.
It was so
Happy
much
New
fun.
Year.
Happy New Year. And this week on the gay agenda, I wish it was more positive news to start 2026, but alas, there are some troublemakers out there. Nate, what do you got for us?
And out of Texas, we should have seen it coming.
Always Texas.
It really is. So, as we previously covered, their Supreme Court recently overturned, or rather changed the rules to allow judges to refuse same-sex marriage, but that didn't stop Judge Dianne Hensley, who's suing to overturn Obergefell versus Hodges, which legalized same-sex marriage back in 2015. Hensley argues that the Supreme Court invented the right to same-sex marriage and overstepped its authority. This lawsuit does mirror the tactics used in Dobbs versus Jackson, and which will signal a broader rollback on civil rights. Over 30 states could ban same-sex marriage again. So it's a big deal.
Can we just talk about the importance of judicial impartiality and how these judges who don't want to you can have arguments you want about, freedom of speech, and you chose to be a judge. So how is an LGBTQ person that might come before you for an unrelated matter supposed to trust your impartiality if you can't do the basic tenets of your job that you were elected to do, which is to occasionally perform weddings? It blows my mind.
Well, here's it. It makes me wonder, and I don't know, and I haven't listened to those other great podcasts on the Supreme Court. It makes me wonder if that they saw this coming, and that there was maybe a movement to change the administrative rule, to allow them to refuse to marry people, to try to stop this from happening. And it happened anyways. This is she got what she wanted, but it's not good enough, and she's going to come for us anyway. And it's so gross. And as you say, this is a judge. This is somebody who's put themselves out there, who's been elected, and has taken an oath to protect all Americans, who couldn't give two flips about what was the number? I think it was over 100,000 same-sex marriages in her state that she didn't care about. So,
and to just,
happy
keep with
hateful
the
holidays.
Yeah. And to just keep with, the good news out of Texas, right? So the city of Arlington on December 9th became the first city in the country to remove sexual orientation and gender identity from their non-discrimination policy. Not every city in the country has them, but they were the first ones who enacted them over a decade ago. And on a 5-4 city council vote, removed them from their non-discrimination ordinance again. I don't know what is in the water in Texas. They claim to be the free state, maybe for straight white men, but certainly not for anybody else.
It's okay. Those protections also got removed from DOT protection. So if you get discriminated against, you can't file a claim into DOT, and that's a federal issue. So, great. Fantastic. Feeling loved.
Feeling
Anyway,
all the
next.
love. From Texas to Massachusetts, where you wouldn't expect necessarily bad news to be coming out of, but a hate group, the Alliance for Defending Freedom, scored a victory and with foster care parents. So foster care parents previously in Massachusetts were required to be affirming of their LGBTQ placements, regardless of their beliefs. Affirmation is essential for the safety and well-being of kids. Like we know that it's not that hard. And you know what doesn't have to happen in Massachusetts anymore because of a lawsuit is that those foster agencies and foster parents are no longer required to be affirming of LGBTQ placements. Right? Those kids have no choice where they get placed. They are placed by the state. So we could be placing LGBTQ kids into unsafe environments in foster care with families who won't support them, who won't affirm them, who won't lift them up because it was a First Amendment violation.
Here's my favorite part. It's just the organization that filed the lawsuit, the Alliance Defending Freedom. Congratulations, Massachusetts and hateful people that want to bring LGBT kids into their homes so they can hate them out loud to their face. You just got the freedom to do so from the organization who's defending freedom. Like, but let's spin the globe. The next story comes out of North Korea. Arkansas. Arkansas Republican lawmakers introduced House Bill 1668, the Vulnerable Youth Protection Act, aimed at intimidating those who support or affirm young people's social transition. But this is my favorite part. This is nothing new, but here's where it gets crazy. The definition of social transition includes changes in clothing, pronouns, hairstyles, and names.
Wait, hairstyles. What's if a boy has long hair? Is that all of a sudden like I don't understand. Like if they wanted to ban mullets, okay, we can talk about banning mullets, like by all means, like no more mullets, right? But like we're talking about going after hair salons for the way they cut someone's hair. Like Lizzie just asked us to have her hair shorter. Does that mean if we were in Arkansas, we'd get in trouble?
Apparently. So this is the freedom we get, folks. Congratulations. So anyway, what did you learn from your daughter this week? Let's get to something that will make my heart feel better as we wrap up this incredible podcast and our interview earlier.
Listen, having a sick kid is not fun. It's not fun for you. It's not fun for them. It breaks your heart because all you want to do is make them feel better and there's nothing you can do. What I learned from my kiddo is what a nurturer she can be. 5-year-olds bounce back faster than 42-year-olds and 39-year-olds. I was still down. Nate, you were still down with the flu and she was starting to feel better. And she just knew when to show up. You know, she wasn't feeling all that great herself. Her energy level was still down, but she would just, say, Daddy, it looks like you're not feeling well. And let me give you some cuddles, right? Or she made me a card, right? She went up to her little arts and craft area that we had set up for her, and she just, on her own, just drew me a get well card. And that little act of love and support, and I don't know what I can do as a 5-year-old, but I'm going to help my daddy try to feel better. And we can learn from our kids every day, right?
Not the truth. Mine's a little funny. So I was talking to Lizzie the other day and I was telling her about how I want her to grow up and it makes me sad because she is my heart and my joy and this means that she doesn't need me as much, but I want her to be independent and I want her to be professionally independent, financially independent. And she looks at me and she goes, Papa, it's okay. I'll still need you to help me open my wine. So I think our kid is paying way too much attention to conversations we're having, but I am happy that the older I get, I will always have her steady hand there. Not now, but when she's old enough to help me open my wine.
That is a great lesson. And that is it for our 6th episode. Happy New Year. Welcome to 2026. Thanks for sticking with us. If you haven't done so already, please make sure you like our social media pages. Please make sure you give us a follow or a subscription on YouTube. And also, this is our 2nd interview. We are still looking for more people who might want to come on our show. So if you have an interest in coming on the Two Gay Dads podcast, reach out to us. You can email us. You can drop us a DM on social media. But we are super proud of this community that you are a part of, that we are building and growing and thriving in together. We wish you all a very, very happy New Year and a very successful 2026.
Happy New Year.